few more people coming in. But I want to welcome you all. This is the culminating event of a year's worth of hard work, and congratulations on getting to this point. Well done. Well done. Give yourself an applause. That's right. What's lovely about, I'm Michael Reichert. I'm the Executive Director for the Center for the Study of Boys and Girls' Lives. I've been with the center from the beginning, since its antecedents, actually. And when I look out and see the faces of you all looking back at me, I see familiar faces, faces I've known for years and years and years, and lots of new faces. So it's great to see both. So we have a full 1.5 days with a new format. Every school is going to be presenting to some section of the roundtable. We have 130 people who will be here ultimately from 10 member schools. And this year we have a guest school that is en route to becoming a member school. Would you please welcome the folks from Philip Exeter School that are here? Just raise your hands, those three that are here. Yeah. Welcome. A special welcome to Brooks Moriarty, Melissa Mishke, and Karen Geary from here they are now. Welcome. And in addition to the 130 students and staff from the 11 schools, we have a wonderful group of students and staff from Penn who are all here. Raise your hands, you folks from Penn and one from Swarthmore College. Just raise your hands, everybody. They're at various places. And we have a special guest speaker who's going to be doing a workshop right after I'm done here. Ileana Jimenez, who's the author of the blog, The Feminist Teacher. She's associate faculty at Bard College and a teacher at the Little Red Schoolhouse, Elizabeth Irwin School, high school, right? Good. Welcome, Ileana. So, just a comment about what we're trying to do here this couple of days. We'll be busy showing what we've done this year, but the roundtable actually aims at something more than a show and tell for budding social science researchers. C.S.B.G.L is not merely a training camp in social science research, nor is it a school improvement initiative just. As involved as you might get in the details of a particular project, your project or another project that resonates with your interests, as involved as you might get in a particular project, I ask you that you also keep your eyes on what underlies all of the different elements of C.S.B.G.L. Roundtable. We hope that you might glimpse something more, a whole that's greater than the sum of its parts. Thus, our title this year is The Transformative Possibilities of Research. Big words, a big promise. You might be wondering what on earth could possibly be exciting or transformative about research. But actually, we hope that we'll make that clear over the course of the next day. The question really is, the question I want you to consider over the next day as you observe the different projects and so forth is, how could research ever warrant the label transformative? To give you just a little bit of a background, a little bit of an orientation, let me tell you a bit about C.S.B.G.L. Founded in 2002 by 5 schools as the Center for the Study of Boys' Lives, it was an effort to answer a problem common to all of the schools: what to do about boys. At that point in 2002, there were decades of a movement for gender equality that had dramatically altered the society, including our schools. Some called it a time for the rise of women. Others called it the end of men, the demise of guys. But by addressing false stories, that's a wonderful descriptive term used by a psychologist at NYU, Niobe Way, but by addressing false stories about boys, about girls, girls' lives were uplifted, boys not so much. The schools that came together to form the Center for the Study of Boys' Lives bravely committed themselves to the study of boys' development and education across these diverse educational contexts. I say bravely because nosing into what was up with the children identified as boys, how we gendered them, and the part that schools played in that was not always so welcomed. In fact, there was lots of kickback on folks that began asking questions about, what are we doing with our boys? How well are we treating them? There was lots of pushback on that. What we discovered as we asked that question, what's up with boys, and we began to study what we were doing to boys, to children identified as boys, what we all discovered was what the women's movement had originally discovered already about girls' lives, that schools operate on two levels. There's the intended conscious curriculum, and there's another largely unconscious set of lessons, messages, and experiences, the invisible, tacit, or hidden curriculum. This second curriculum is rarely seen as such. It's rarely seen as a set of lessons that we are conveying to children. More often it is simply seen as the way things are, and a reality everyone simply has to submit to. While every student, you all, would acknowledge how powerfully your experience in school affects how you see yourselves and imagine your futures, none of the adults in schools generally feel like we are actually in charge of that second tacit or hidden curriculum. Most of us feel as if the curriculum happens to us, all of us. It exists independent of our agency. The center became about helping schools get better control over this second curriculum. But how to do that? There were two significant developments in our evolution as a center. In 2005, we became the Center for the Study of Boys' and Girls' Lives, with the recognition that to study boys was to study girls, was to study people in relationship to each other, and gender is one of the forces that actually mediates how we relate. The center became, at that point, as we committed ourselves to understanding how schools play a part in conveying lessons about what it means to be a boy, what it means to be a girl to children, how we form your self-conscious sense of yourself and your possibility, we became more powerfully, in a more focused way, we became about social justice and the right of each young person to develop your full human capacities. But the hidden curriculum is elusive. How actually to know something that is so invisible is the challenge. It turns out that the force of gender or race or class or homophobia is not so invisible to the intended targets of school socialization, young people. In the second key development, after we changed our name, acknowledged that gender is a relationship, the second key development was to acknowledge that young people could actually tell us about the hidden curriculum of the school because it's happening to you in your experience of the school in ways that are sometimes invisible to the adults in the school. So what we could do is we could actually employ students as researchers to mine, to bring to light, to bring into the forefront of our awareness what's happening in students' experience. Youth participatory action research became our primary methodology. So, with all of that background said, back to the matter of our claim for transformative possibilities from YPAR. On what basis do we claim that transformation as a goal for our work? To the extent that each of your projects aims at an action phase, youth participatory action research, we can say that change in school practices, improvement, is at the core of what you're doing. In our impact assessment research, which you're going to be participating in later tonight, we are still seeking to document how effectively our model for school improvement, school change, actually plays out in practice. But the research has already clearly established that transformation happens in other ways. It doesn't just affect school practices, it affects participants in the research process itself. When you begin to identify a topic you want to study and you begin asking questions about that topic, when you begin conducting interviews with fellow students around questions of race or gender or social class, you actually become transformed yourself, and you begin to transform your school cultures that way. Those are the stories we're hearing. You tell us in your experience from C.S.B.G.L. So that's what we hope you can glimpse in the next day and a half, that instead of submitting simply to the way things are, your participation in this model, this C.S.B.G.L. YPAR model, is actually a transformative experience for you, for your friends, and school cultures, and we hope in the long run in school policies and practices. Thank you for being here and for participating in this. We're looking forward to hearing what you have to say. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Hello. Welcome. I'm so excited that some of you are here for another year and that some of you who are new are going to get to experience the roundtable this year. So just so you all know, I'm Charlotte, so I'm the one who may have been sending you annoying emails for the past, couple of weeks. Thank you. Thanks, Steve. So I work with the Shipley School, and I also work with Georgetown Day School. And we have a really, we do have a really exciting program for you over this next day and a half. I have the extreme pleasure of introducing Ileana Jimenez, who is going to lead us through a workshop focusing on intersectionality, specifically around race and gender. For those of you who were here last year, we had Dr. Howard Stevenson, who came and did a workshop with us around race, and this is really reflective of C.S.B.G.L. wanting to take a move forward in thinking about the different sociocultural identifiers that we're asking you to explore through your research projects. And so as we're going through our roundtables, we're thinking about different ways that we can get people who specialize in this work to come and talk with you about how you can approach studying this topic, and just different questions you might have, and challenges and successes that you might have around doing this work. So without further ado, I'm going to give you just a little bit of background about Ileana because she is quite an accomplished woman. I'm so excited that she's here. So Ileana and I met maybe 3 or 4 years ago at AERA, which is an education researcher conference, and I was in the audience, and Ileana was talking about her work as her alter ego feminist teacher. So if you go and you Google feminist teacher, you can see her blog, you can see all of the different work that she does. And when she's not doing that, she is an English teacher at the Elizabeth Irwin High School, which is an independent school in New York City. And then a couple of years ago, Ileana and I were lucky enough to sit on a panel together at the National Women's Studies Association conference. And so my work revolves around adolescent girls, and Ileana's work revolves around young people and how they approach feminism and teaching them about feminism and intersectionality. And so when we were in our C.S.B.G.L. meetings and we were tossing around the ideas of different people who we'd want to come and work with you all, Ileana immediately came to mind, and I strongly advocated for her here. So just to give you a little bit more background, so for nearly 20 years, she has been a leader in the field of feminist and social justice education. In an effort to inspire teachers to bring intersectional feminism to the K-12 classroom, she launched her blog, Feminist Teacher, in 2009. She is also the creator of hashtag #HSFeminism and hashtag K12Feminism. So if you want to, as we're doing this, if you want to tweet, you can. Her social media presence has lifted up the work of high school feminism teachers nationally and globally, bringing exciting visibility to the Feminism in Schools movement. As a high school teacher in New York, Ileana teaches innovative high school courses on feminism and activism that have gained the attention of education activist circles. She also teaches American literature with a social justice intersectional lens, a course on Toni Morrison's Beloved, a queer love stories class, and a memoir writing course. Ileana is also an associate faculty member at Bard College's Institute for Writing and Thinking, where she offers workshops to teachers and college instructors on writing-based inquiry. As a 2010 recipient of the Distinguished Fulbright Award in Teaching, her research in Mexico City focused on creating safe schools for Mexican LGBT youth. And a strong believer in building community between teachers, in 2005, Ileana founded the New York Independent Schools LGBT Educators Group and providing LGBTQ+ educators and their allies professional development and networking opportunities. So there's a lot more I could say. If you want to go to her blog, Feminist Teacher, you can read her whole bio there. But because there's a lot that we want to get done and we have a tight schedule, I am going to turn it over to Ileana to start the work. And if you have any questions throughout the roundtable, please feel free to reach out to me or any of the other C.S.B.G.L staff that you see around. Great. I'm excited for these next few days.
Everybody. This is so exciting. I feel like I'm talking to my peeps here because I've been in independent schools for almost 20 years. And this is actually a dream come true because when I started teaching in independent schools, intersectionality was a word that I knew that I had learned in college, but it took 20 years for this word to actually gain any traction within our world of teaching, of professional development, of kind of inclusive curricula, diversity work, all of that. Earlier, the question was asked, how does research warrant the label of transformative? And I definitely think it does. As part of her intro, Charlotte mentioned that I had gone to Mexico City on a Fulbright, and if there are any educators in the room, I highly recommend that you Google Distinguished Fulbright Award in Teaching. It is a very little known Fulbright for teachers that allows you to pursue a question that you feel passionate about. And for me, the question was, what are the ways in which we can create safe and inclusive schools for queer youth, both nationally and globally? And I got to work with queer youth in Mexico City, and they just completely blew my mind. And it was a game changer for me. So I'm sure that the PAR research projects that you did were game changers for you and the work you'll be able to do moving forward. So I'm going to talk about the transformative possibilities of intersectionality. You've done a lot of great research, and now what I'd like to do is kind of talk about how intersectionality itself could be used in that framework. Okay, so I think, so this is the kind of the agenda for tonight, which is that I teach a course on feminism and activism to high school students at LREI, which is the Little Red Schoolhouse and Elizabeth Irwin High School in downtown Manhattan. LREI has a beautiful history. It was founded by a woman named Elizabeth Irwin, who had gone to Packer Collegiate in Brooklyn. And then she went on to Smith. And while she was there, she had a girlfriend. She graduated from Smith. She moved to New York, and she was a part of John Dewey's Circle. And she also went on to have a partner. She was a pioneer in education by creating the first progressive school, the Little Red Schoolhouse, in 1921. That school then lasted for about, well, first of all, it's still in existence, but it was a public school at first. So it was a public school experiment. And then in 1941, the Elizabeth Irwin High School was founded as a way to extend progressive education into the high school years. And the students themselves voted to name the high school after her, which is why we have such a long name. Angela Davis actually graduated from our school in the early 60s. So we have a really great commitment to social justice throughout the years. From there, I'm going to use my class, my feminism class, as a model for how to do intersectional work. And I'm going to show you a couple of pieces of student writing that my students have done using an intersectional lens. Then I'll show you a PAR project that we did at LREI on girls and sexuality, and in particular on slut shaming. Then I'll engage you in a conversation around boys and feminism. The class that I teach has always had boys in the class. Why do boys take this class? What compels them to do so? And then we'll talk about next steps at your school. So a little bit about my history, just briefly, in independent schools. I started at Roland Park Country School in 1997. It's a girls' school in Baltimore. And I went straight from Smith to Roland Park and had really a rude awakening, which is that I had gone to a women's college for 4 years, and I thought that girls' schools were kind of going to be a mini-me of women's colleges, but in actuality, they're not mini-me's. And if anybody has ever gone to a girls' school and a women's college, you'll know what I mean, which is that girls' schools and women's colleges, although focusing on single gender education, what I received at Smith after going to K through 12 public schools was a feminist education, an intersectional feminist education. And I thought that by teaching in girls' schools, I would just be extending that work. And it actually really wasn't. And I struggled a lot. It was a big challenge for me to be in girls' schools those first 7 years, mainly because feminism was being defined more in a kind of corporate feminist kind of way, which is that reach the top, become a corporate executive or lawyer, and that it was considered feminism. That wasn't feminism for me. Feminism for me was about intersectional analysis of race, class, gender, sexuality, ethnicity, all the ways in which the systems of oppression connect. And it took a lot to kind of navigate those first 7 years. I was at Holton Arms as well. I think GDS is in the room, right down the road. I was at Holton Arms for about 5 years and taught an African American and Latina women writers class while I was there, and really tried to do some intersectional feminist work with the girls there. And also, it was a challenge in many ways. And behind closed doors, I had to kind of really provide a rationale for the type of work I was doing. And over the course of those 7 years, between 22 years old and 29, it was one of these kind of rude awakenings of what are the ways in which my political, philosophical pedagogy needs to be in line with where I work. And that was how I found LREI, which is where I work now. The Little Red Schoolhouse and Elizabeth Irwin High School, as I mentioned, has always been committed to social justice. And the courses that I teach there, as Charlotte mentioned, are a range of American Lit for 10th grade, and it's a social justice class. We teach all the kind of canonical courses or texts in this class, like Scarlet Letter, The Great Gatsby, but then we pair them with other texts that will engage students in an intersectional analysis. So In the Blood, which is a modern day version of the Hester story, we bring that together. In my feminism class, which is a junior-senior elective, and these are the students who have taken it over the course of the years, I've been teaching it for about 8 or 9 years as a strictly feminism and activism elective, has been taken by a range of students, boys, girls, transgender girls and boys, students of color, boys of color, girls of color, international students who come to our school, Muslim students, Nigerian Muslim students. And what it is a real training ground for not only theory and feminist theory, but actually bringing the world, that feminist theory into the world of action. And this picture over here, in particular in the corner, some of my students came to present with me at NICOR, and they did a lot of work on intersectional blogging, and I'll get to share some of their work with you in a second. So what is high school feminism? First of all, for me, there are very key components. It's intersectional in nature. And for me, intersectionality, as I mentioned before, is a theory that examines systems of oppression and how they connect racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia. All of these are systems that connect. And I think over the course of time, independent schools have largely looked at systems of oppression separately in silos. But now we're beginning to see that racism and sexism and classism and homophobia and transphobia are actually experienced simultaneously. And this is something that women of color feminists have been saying since the second wave in the 60s and 70s. And when Kimberly Crenshaw coined the word in 1989, feminists in particular, began to kind of use it in their scholarship. But now schools, in particular independent schools, are beginning to use this word as a part of their work. And hopefully by the end of today, you will feel inspired to do that as well. So the course is inherently intersectional. It's inherently interdisciplinary. I'm trained as an English teacher, but I don't just do literature in this class. I do literature, history, art history, media, blogging, activism. All of these things inform each other as we move through the course. It's also innovative, which is that a lot of times independent schools will use the word innovative, and they are not using it in the context of social justice. They're using it in the context of something like design thinking, or they're using it in the context of engineering or STEM. But social justice and diversity and inclusion work is also innovative. You can do cutting-edge work that is at the brink of bringing schools to the next level with innovative methods of social justice. And for me, it's feminist methods. It's also intergenerational, which is that I started teaching at 22. I'm 41. So I'm a little farther away from my students than I was almost 20 years ago. And I want to make sure that the students I teach are getting to meet a range of different types of feminists who are doing this work on the ground. Feminists who are older than I am, feminists who are younger than I am, women of color feminists, men, across a spectrum of ages. This movement is local, national, and global. I have traveled in various sectors to India, to the UK, to Greece. There's feminism in schools all over the world. And my goal is to continue to work with teachers and students to do this work in a really highly innovative way so that you can begin to do social justice work in very cutting edge, creative, inclusive practices that you can bring to your schools. It's multi-issue. So when students take my class, sometimes they walk in and they say, oh, this is going to be a class on reproductive rights, Planned Parenthood. And I say to them, you need to sit down, which is that this is not going to be a course on one issue. This is going to be a course on sexual harassment, street harassment, slut shaming. It's going to be a class on women of color feminisms, global feminism, toxic masculinity. All of these things connect. And when students are talking about immigration or the environment or sustainability, those are also feminist issues. They're also media makers, which is that the course I teach has its own blog called F to the Third Power. And the students themselves blog on this because I want them to contribute to a larger public online discourse of feminism online, which is that all of you are online. Some of you are on your phones right now, right? And part of that is to, if you're already online, on Instagram, on Twitter, Facebook, etc., why not have you participate in intersectional feminist ways online if you're already there? Teacher leaders. There are a lot of teacher leaders in the room. You're creating spaces and holding spaces of healing, of rejuvenation, of nurture, of research. The research itself, I think, is a form of nurturing, right? Which is that you're creating spaces for research so that your schools can be healed to do better work with each other. So how can we get teacher leaders to be a part of this movement with you? And ultimately, this is about student-driven change. PAR research is about student-driven change. How can you bring a feminist lens to that? So let's look at the actual definition of intersectionality. I'm going to ask some students to help me out. Student right here in the front, do you want to read what it says there? Say your name and your school. Greenwich Academy, GA. Awesome. I did a workshop there a number of years ago. Go ahead. Okay, that was a lot of words, and we're going to make this much more accessible. Okay, Kimberly Crenshaw coined the term intersectionality, but that doesn't mean that that's when it started in 1989. I like to theorize that intersectionality started when Sojourner Truth said, ain't I a woman? So for me, intersectionality is about going back into Black feminist thought and thinking and activism through a kind of genealogy that goes back to the time of enslavement. It was black feminists like Audre Lorde, Bell Hooks, Chicana feminists like Shadi Moraga, Gloria Anzaldúa, who were doing second wave feminism when other feminists of the time, white middle-class feminists, were doing feminism, but they were doing it only under the context of gender. And women of color feminists, lesbian feminists of color were saying, wait, you're not thinking about homophobia. You're not thinking about racism. You're not thinking about violence against women of color. We are experiencing these things at the intersections. So often when my students come to my class, I'll ask them what they think feminism is. And almost always, they're going to be thinking about it under this like silo of just gender. But then as the trajectory of the course develops, they begin to see that it's intersectional. And some of them are using that word intersectionality on the first day, but they don't have the literature and the theory behind them to truly understand the root of how this is all connected. I asked them on the first day, write a story about the messages regarding gender you have received from the media, from school, from family. And when they come in the next day with that narrative and they share their story out loud about the messages they've received about gender, they realize that their stories were and are inherently intersectional because they can't talk about gender without talking about their Muslim family at home. They can't talk about their Caribbean culture. They can't talk about being asexual or intersex or transgender. So all of these things connect. And as you move through life, particularly under these systems of oppression, you begin to see that these are all systemic. Second half of the definition. I need somebody else. Gentleman over here. Yes, you.
I'm wrong. I go to
Georgetown
Georgetown Day School.
Day School.
Intersectionality holds that the classical conceptualization of oppression within society, such as racism, sexism, homophobia, and religion, or belief-based bigotry, do not act independently one on another. Instead, these forms of oppression interrelate, creating a system of oppression that reflects the intersection of multiple forms of discrimination.
Okay. So everyone in this room experiences intersectionality every time you walk into your school. When you hear racist comments in the hallway. When you hear homophobic comments when you sit at your dining hall. When you hear about vacations people have been on and you think about your socioeconomic class status. And you think about how that affects you in terms of your race, your gender, your class, your sexuality. How does my queerness, how does my socioeconomic class, how does my culture respond to this moment that I hear that is racist or classist or homophobic? So I'll use myself as an example. I'm 41. I identify as a woman. I'm cisgender, which means that my biological gender and the gender that I feel in my head connects. I'm queer. I'm Latina. My family was born in Puerto Rico. I'm first generation. I was first in my family to go to school, to go to college. So there is no way that I walk into an independent school without all of these pieces of me engaging with the environments I've been in over the last 19 years. I've heard racist comments said in front of me, almost always because people read me as white. And so they will think it's okay to be a little bit racist. And they think it's okay. But it's not okay, because then I have to come out and say, actually, that hurt me. I remember I was at a school where I was introduced by a counselor, the psychologist, as Miss Rodriguez. My last name is Jimenez. And I just gently corrected her and I said, actually it's Jimenez. And the school psychologist said, well, they all sound the same anyway, it's okay. So like those little microaggressions that we hear, that's a part of the ways in which we navigate our lives in independent schools, right? Like we're kind of just brushed away. And as a queer woman of color, that moment was really like I felt all of those things against every single part of me. I was closeted for the 7 years that I was in girls' schools, largely because I did not feel safe. I did not feel safe coming out. And it really affected me mentally, emotionally, especially when other girls were coming out and they asked me to lead the GSA. And I thought, oh my God, what do they know? Is it on me? And now, I can't imagine navigating my classroom without all pieces of me being a text in the class as much as my students are a text in the class. So how do they do that? Intersectionality is the most productive form of feminism. Earlier I said that we need to be more innovative in the way that we do social justice work in schools and diversity inclusion work in schools. You can't do this work without being intersectional. And if you are intersectional, you are being inherently feminist. It's productive because it leads to transformative possibilities. It leads to liberation. It leads to healing. It leads to open conversation. It leads to authenticity. That's what intersectionality does. And aren't we trying to engage our students to be more authentic, to lead more authentic lives? This will do the work. Some of the texts that I do in the class is kind of this lineup of women of color feminisms. This is the core of it. I'm not going to read every single author here, but it's a combination of classic and contemporary women of color feminists like Audre Lorde, Bell Hooks, Shadi Moraga, Anita Hill, Brittany Cooper, who now teaches at Rutgers. Soraya Chumley does a lot of slut-shaming work on the Huffington Post, if you want to look that up. So this kind of mix of text is what my students are reading to begin looking at their own lives. Part of what they do is they write an intersectionality essay. And I'm going to have Charlotte hand out an essay that was written by one of my students, a young white man. This essay is part of a larger piece that he wrote for my class. And the assignment is that they need to, it's the end of the trimester. So they receive this intersectionality assignment, and the requirements is that they need to make reference to the readings we've done throughout the course on women of color feminisms, and they need to kind of create their own feminist genealogy and use intersectionality as a way to examine not only their own identity, but some system as well. So moving from theory to self to systems. I'm going to have the gentleman in the middle with like the white and blue kind of plaid read. Yeah, I'm going to have you, what's your name? George from St. Paul's. Is that in Baltimore? No. New Hampshire, right. There's another St. Paul someplace else. Okay, you're going to read the first paragraph up to the asterisk. And then we're going to have another gentleman with the sunglasses on top of his head. He just stood up. You're going to read the paragraph that begins with Kimberly Crenshaw. You're going to the bathroom. Awesome. It's just like class. I'm going to have the gentleman on the end. Kimberly Crenshaw coined the term intersectionality. Yeah? What's your name? Also from St. Paul's, great. And then the gentleman in the back without a tie on. What is your name? Miles, you're from? Shipley, fantastic. Okay, so first gentleman is going to read Other Than Uncle Sam. Second gentleman, Kimberly Crenshaw. Third gentleman, The Oppression of Women of Color. And then I need one more gentleman. Oh, this head of school right here in the front. Are you a head of school? By the end, you might not be. If you could read the first person to point out this responsibility to me, please, when we get there. Okay, so this is an actual student. He's a senior, young white male, and he took the feminism class. And I just want to say that I also asked my students to write a process piece at the end, and I just want to read a little bit about just what he wrote at the end. He goes, "Writing this paper was one of the most difficult things I've done in high school. In addition to the sheer length of the paper, which you don't have in front of you, one of my longest, I feel like I've dug deeper in this paper than any ever before." And then he says at the end, this was a grueling assignment, but it was worth it. Okay. All right, gentlemen, whenever you want to start.
Other than Uncle, other than Uncle Sam and Jesus Christ, there are a few more recognizable figures in American history than Clark Kent. Superman has been an American icon since his creation in the early 1930s, causing an endless stream of young children to idolize him and dress up like him for Halloween. Superman symbolizes fairness and justice, but more than anything else, he represents the things Americans feel the most comfortable with. Clark Kent is white, Clark Kent is straight, and while Supergirl has her own TV show now, she isn't provided with half of the status that her male counterpart is. These are classic American ideals: whiteness, unquestioned heterosexuality, and maleness. They cause uproar whenever they are challenged. For instance, take the shocking backlash Michael B. Jordan faced after it was announced he would be playing the Human Torch, a role that had been previously only played by white actors. The main characters of all the highest grossing superhero movies, Iron Man, Thor, Batman, Spider-Man, Chris Pratt's Star-Lord, Superman, all of these characters share the same three key traits. They are all straight white men, and they are all considered the biggest heroes by America's youth. Of course, these characters are fictional. Real people who fit into these standards are closer to villains than heroes in modern-day United States. This isn't a personal attack on every white, straight, male person in the country. I cannot speak for anyone's private actions or morals, and I fit perfectly into those criteria myself. However, it should be acknowledged that real-life people who look like Superman, people who look like me, tend to do a lot more harm than good in society. Straight white men oppress and or directly benefit from the oppression of various marginalized groups such as women, people of color, and members of the LGBTQ community.
Watch how he moves to watch his next rhetorical move in this essay. So go ahead.
Kimberly Crenshaw coined the term intersectionality, putting a name to the idea that ended up in root feminism, primarily black feminism, for so long. This refers to the concept that systems of oppression or systems of privilege interlock or go hand in hand with each other and must be taken down together in order to gain equality in society. We cannot fight one form of oppression just one at a time for the sake of pragmatism. As Crenshaw writes, any analysis that does not take intersectionality into account cannot sufficiently address the particular manner in which black women are subordinated. Of course, it isn't just black women. Intersectionality means different things to different people. For instance, the place where Superman and I intersect on the spectrum is going to be completely different than the intersection point of a lesbian woman of color. That woman will face a completely different struggle than I will, considering my identities of race, gender, and sexuality. I hardly face any systemic struggles at all. Even so, even if I never meet a queer woman of color, my presence in society does her work. Even if I don't personally oppress her myself, I directly benefit from her oppression on various different levels.
The oppression of women, people of color, and LGBTQ people will occur regardless of the intent of the straight white men who dominate society today. When Henry Cavill's stars in Man of Steel, I doubt he has any desire to contribute to the oppression of marginalized groups, but the toxic standards his character sets by glorifying hypermasculinity, heterosexuality, and whiteness. There are just two people of color in that movie do just that. To try and solve this problem, people who look like me and Superman have to use tremendous influence they hold in society to make change. To stick with superhero analogies, people who look like I do have great power in society, and with that comes great responsibility. I have to use the huge amount of privilege at my disposal to better society and fight for equality for people who don't have that privilege.
Okay, he's going to reach further back into his genealogy now. I think this, yes, tell me your name and your school again.
The first person to point out this responsibility to me was my incredible grandmother, Charlene. After being fired from Queen's University of Charlotte in the early 1960s for her controversial stance on racial issues, Charlene found the Red Clay Reader, an annual collection of poetry and other writing, first released in 1964, well before Ms. Magazine revolutionized women's magazines. The Reader primarily tackled issues my grandmother believed other publications would never write about, such as race, class, and gender. Charlene first told me about the journal when I was 10 or 11 years old. Reading some of the radical poems and essays myself was my first exposure to intersectionality, although I had never heard the term and it hadn't even been coined at the time of publication. This was the first time it struck me that racism and sexism weren't necessarily completely separate ailments, and that they might fit together in a larger system of oppression. Even though the term intersectionality didn't exist yet, that was clear through those writings and the writings of feminists of color at the time, such as Cherie Moraga and Audre Lorde, although I'm unsure if Charlene has ever heard of the term intersectionality. She explained to me that I benefited from both racism and sexism within a larger system. I didn't face the struggles that African Americans or other people of color face on a daily basis, nor did I have to deal with the problems she struggled with as a woman, she told me. She said I would never be able to fully understand the struggles of women or people of color, but I was lucky enough to have the power to make changes in society. In my youthful naivete, I attempted to defend myself. I don't remember exactly what I said, but it was something along the lines of, quote, I'm not racist, I love black people, end quote. And she told me then that it didn't matter. That didn't matter because again, I benefit from the oppression regardless of my personal intent. I tried to take what she said to heart, but it took me a while to have what Joe Samillan, a white male feminist and activist who works on violence against women issues for the group Breakthrough, refers to as, quote, a wow moment, or what some call a feminist clique.
Thank you. Beautiful reading. We're going to read one more section just to bring in the social media part. I'm going to need 3 more boys, or at least, 3 more boys to do this. I see a hand. What's your name? And what school are you from? Great. So university school. Can you do, of course, my white privilege up to the word wrong? And then, there, as you can see, there's like a screenshot of like an inbox message there in the back. I think it's Instagram, or maybe it's Facebook, but it goes in there. Does anybody want to do that little section? Let's have a young woman do it. You want to do it? What's your name? Parker. And then I need another gentleman in the back, maybe the gentleman with the blazer on. I see some blazers back there. What's your name? Great. Reed, and you go to? Shipley. Awesome. Can you go to looking back on this moment and then just go to the end, okay? So we're just going to look at this and see what is this student doing? How is he using the readings of the class to look at his own experiences of race, class, gender, sexuality, and now we're going to look at rape culture. Okay? Is it Max? Go ahead, Max.
Of course, my white privilege isn't the only one I have. As high school went on, I've tried to be more observant of all my privileges. There are surely still times when I mansplain or white-splain or straight-splain. I do my best to catch myself, but sometimes I fail to. A recent experience of mine on Facebook made me notice my privilege as a male. The public post I had initially commented on has since been deleted. The course of events went something like this. A girl posted a status denouncing a local independent school for not discouraging rape culture and having 3 different male students accused of rape. A classmate of hers, whose best friend went to the school in question, came to the administration's defense, writing that blaming just a single school was a deflection, that this happens at every school. Defensively, I responded, not at my school. The likes for the comment flooded in, and I felt like I had done the right thing and properly defended my school. So naturally, I was confused when a girl I knew subbed me on Instagram for my comment, telling me to wake up. I started a conversation with her on Facebook to find out what I had done wrong.
All right, so the Facebook conversation. Go ahead, Parker.
Were you being serious when you said that this doesn't happen at your school?
Yes, as in I have never heard of a rapist at my school. Am I wrong to assume that's true?
I don't know if that's true or not because I don't know many people at your school. But it's inaccurate to state that it's not a problem at your school when although the exact case might not have happened, everyone is living in this kind of rape culture where girls get very little justice. I just think it's insensitive to make that statement when there very possible could be a girl at your school who was raped and could now feel like that's not justified because it's not an issue.
Okay, so he's using this little piece as evidence as part of his essay. Next reader.
Looking back on this moment, I'm reminded again of Sherry Moraga's belief that she had to start all over. To that point, I had focused so heavily on my racial belief that I totally disregarded my privileges as a male that I benefited from at the same time. I can look back now and see that it's intersectionally again. The Kabahi River Collective wrote of simultaneous oppressions. I benefit from the other side of that, a series of interlocking simultaneous privileges. As Lisa points out, I was being utterly insensitive to the issue at hand. Regardless of my intent, it was entirely possible that I could have made a girl at my school feel like her problems were not justified. As Lisa wrote, I realized that I had been blind to the issue completely. As I told Lisa, there had been a fact of a girl at my school, a friend of mine, who had been raped. I never wanted to make her or any other survivor feel like their experience was unimportant. I was dumbfounded as to how I could have said something so reckless without even recognizing what I was saying. This was when I had one of Joe Sumlin's wow moments. I realized that in my male bubble, I hardly ever think about rape. I don't have to think about how tight or short my clothes are. I don't have to fear strangers in the street at night. I don't think twice when someone hands me a drink at a party. I don't have to check with my parents every half hour I'm out. I know I can trust the people closest to me. I never feel scared that someone is going to try and rape me. And so I noticed another new blind spot I had. I ignored the inherent privileges that I have as a straight man and was insensitive to the hundreds of young women at my school that are at a much higher risk. Worst of all, I could have offended or discouraged a friend of mine who had gone through a truly traumatic experience.
Okay. Thank you for all the readers. I just want to take a few moments to have you marinate this. Are there any initial responses to this piece so far? And how the student is using intersectionality as a way to examine himself and as a way to move from theory, like the readings in the class, to himself, to larger systems outside of himself, such as rape, violence against women, school, sexism, racism. He has another whole story about race as well. Any initial responses? connections. Yes, say your name and your school. Miss Porter's, yay. Can you say one more sentence after that? You're in awe because? Anybody else want to say one more sentence after that? But what does that mean, because he's a guy? Yes. The damaging effects of toxic masculinity are everywhere, which is that actually toxic masculinity damages boys. And as a result, we create a culture that is volatile, that is so violent, that not only is it damaging boys, but as a result, it also damages girls and women as a result. Other comments? I think his first line is fascinating. Other than Uncle Sam and Jesus Christ, there are a few more recognizable figures in American history than Clark Kent. Jesus Christ is a part of American history. And like right there, we see the master narrative, right? Like the part of what are the ways in which we internalize certain narratives of power and authority in our culture, to the extent that Jesus Christ is a part of American history and a master narrative that we've internalized since the time we were children, through things like animation, media, movies, all these things. And those are the ways in which we learn about power and masculinity. And girls and also learn about masculinity and power as through these channels as well. Okay, so I'm going to pause there. The students in my class blog on this site that I mentioned earlier. It's called F to the Third Power, and this is a site where they make this kind of writing public. You see in the corner there, Examining White Privilege as an Act of Decolonization is a blog post. Another one, Healing Black Masculinity, a talk between Bell Hooks and Kevin Powell. Another one in the middle, Got Privilege, a Queer White Girl's Epiphany. These are some of the blog posts on this site. I thought I would share with you another piece of writing, but I actually don't know how much time we have left. I have a half an hour. Okay, so do you want to hear Jessica's blog post? I'm asking the students in particular. This is all for you. So Jessica's blog post is about Black girls' sexuality and Black Lives Matter. Does this interest you to hear her read her blog post? Okay, so I'm going to share it, and there's another handout that Charlotte is going to give you, because I just want you to see what she's doing as well rhetorically. And for the teachers in the room, I want you to notice what she's doing with the text that I've given her in the class and how she's connecting that to her own identity. This is also for students to listen to. How she's connecting the readings in the room, readings in the class, to her own identity, but then she goes outward and starts to examine systems, such as depictions of Black girls and women in the media. And then she makes a brilliant move and connects that to If we are demeaning and dehumanizing to black girls and women in the media, we're also being dehumanizing and demeaning to black girls and women at school, which is then leading them to be pushed out, violence against women and girls of color in school, and then imprisonment, and then state police, moving into things like murder, Sandra Bland, etc. So connecting this to a feminist reading of Black Lives Matter. Okay.
A Black Girl's Take on Body Geography by Jessica.
Can you read it?
Growing up a black girl in a semi-religious household, the conversation on sexuality was never brought up, unless it had to do with the man I was going to marry or the family I would have. My family is not ignorant about the existence of sexual orientations beyond heterosexual. However, they have always been dismissive of the conversation on sexuality, choosing to stay silent if I ever inquired about how they would feel if you found out I was a lesbian, simply as a hypothetical. After a while, the standoffish way of answering to my questions led me to believe that sexuality was not an important part of my life. But after attending a talk facilitated by Bell Hooks and Charles Blow at the new school called Radical Sexuality, Body Geography, my entire world flipped upside down. This was the first time in my 16 years of being a young black girl that I had ever heard a black woman and a black man speak so freely on the subject of sexuality. And not sexuality in the context of that awkward talk on the birds and the bees, but in a larger sense of how one creates a relationship with their mind, body, and spirit. I found it extremely powerful when Hooks and Blow indicated that sexuality, for many individuals, is not static, but actually sits on an ever-moving spectrum. Hooks made a remark about the difference between intrinsic sexuality and the external practice of sexuality. She explained how even though you may be a lesbian, it does not mean you must always be in a romantic or sexual relationship with another woman. Just because you may identify as one sexuality does not mean that relationships with other people, whether sexual, romantic, etc., are off limits. This notion of sexuality as, in Bell Hooks' words, movement and practice, is not something that everyone may be able to wrap their head around. However, I think it is important, especially for myself and possibly other young black girls, to realize that we do not have to limit our sexuality, to a single box. I specifically remember Hooks emphasizing the importance of having a relationship with one's own body. For women, and specifically black women, it is important to learn that understanding one's body should not occur in, as Hooks says, a perverse place. She also goes further to say, life is an endless negotiation with ourselves and the world. It made me wonder, how can such a task of creating a relationship with one's body be achieved in the world I live in today? I started my research by revisiting mainstream media with a feminist lens. The examples I found of current-day portrayals of black women mainly consisted of long straight hair, weave, the over-sexualization of the big booty and being able to shake it, and the baby mama or ratchet archetypes. I looked at Taylor Swift's Shake It Off, Miley Cyrus's We Can't Stop, Nicki Minaj's Anaconda, and A$AP Rocky's Effin' Problems as some of the most well-known depictions of black girls and women, especially when featured in mainstream white media and mainstream black hip-hop. I personally do not find anything wrong with a black girl showing off what she's got. However, it becomes problematic when that is one of the only prominent portrayals of black women in today's media. In 2013, Essence published an article on a study they conducted with 1,200 women on the portrayal of black women in the media. They found that younger women, ages 18 to 29, were more likely than older women to be aware of negative typologies, e.g. black mamas, angry black women, and unhealthy black women, and also likely to find them compelling. This may be because younger generations consume more media overall, especially digital media, where many of the negative types run rampant. In the same study, Essence found that non-Hispanic white women cited negative typologies as most representative of black women they've encountered in their life, namely baby mamas, angry black women, unhealthy black women, and uneducated sisters. So it is not far off to say it is not an easy task for young black girls and women to explore their sexuality in this day and age. When the media constantly portrays black women in such a one-dimensional manner, it begins to make young black girls and women believe they belong in such a narrow box. I mean, some of my closest friends are still surprised and seemingly disappointed when they discover that I am a black girl who cannot twerk. Taking it back to the bell hooks and Charles Blow talk, it becomes even more difficult for young black girls to find their own sexual self-worth when living in a world where mainstream media always finds a way to make the black female body an over-sexualized object. This hypersexualization of young black girls and women connects strongly to the invisibility of black girls in America. In the same month I attended the Hooks Talk, my high school feminism class led an International Day of the Girl Assembly, where we presented and spoke on topics that greatly affect girls nationally and globally. My talk focused on the invisibility of black girls in the fight for Black Lives Matter, and within our overall societal structures such as education. Many young black girls who identify as straight and LGBT+ have no accurate representation in the media. Our society does not recognize or acknowledge that black girls face some of the same forms of discrimination that young black boys and men face on a regular basis. For example, young black girls in New York are 53 times more likely to get expelled and 6 times more likely to get suspended compared to their white counterparts, for reasons that have no real merit, as seen in an article titled Black Girls Matter by Kimberly Crenshaw. Many do not know about these harmful statistics because the problems that face young black girls in America are seen as insignificant or even non-existent. Until that moment, society stops feeding into the over-sexualization and dehumanizing stereotypes mainstream media has about us. Young black girls will always be forgotten. We need to change this conversation immediately. After hearing Hooks and Blow and looking into mass media, it's obvious that young women of color need to be the only voices heard in the conversation on our own bodies.
Okay, so this was a blog post on After the Third Power. Again, just maybe 3 student voices, any initial reactions to this piece and how she's bringing together issues that are important to her using some of the readings from the class and also the event that we went to as a class to go hear Bell Hooks, who is also a part of the course curriculum. And the initial connections, questions, observations about how she's using intersectionality to write this piece. Any observations from educators or admin or school leaders? Yes, go ahead. When she refers to my high school feminism class led an International Day of the Girl Assembly, she and another girl led a section of that assembly where they talked about Say Her Name, hashtag Say Her Name, and the ways in which black women and girls have been erased from conversations around Black Lives Matter. The hashtag Black Lives Matter was started by queer women of color, which has also been erased from the conversation. So what are the ways in which erasure of women of color, I mentioned for me, Sojourner Truth is the beginning of intersectionality. And often what we're hearing today is, well, let's just read Ta-Nehisi Coates' book and thinking that that is the beginning of conversations about race, when actually women of color have been doing this for so long and are completely erased from the conversation about books we need to read. Let's read Sister Outsider by Audre Lorde. Any other observations? Yes, right here. saw one more hand in the back. Yes, GDS. Jessica has been at LREI for she's a lifer. So she's K through 12. And for her, this blog post was one of the things that kind of brought together so many of her experiences. And then she wrote, her intersectionality essay was actually a series of poems that was inspired by reading Entasaki Shange's For Colored Girls. So she's doing a lot of work in this class on bringing together her personal experiences, but then also reading and writing about systems. Okay, I thought I would share with you a video that the students at my school did on PAR, since there was so much PAR work done in this room, and what we did with PAR and girls' sexuality. This was done by a separate laboratory class that I led with Deb Tolman at CUNY. And I thought I would just show it to you briefly, just to show you that girls' sexuality is something that we were very interested at LREI, and this is what we did as part of our PAR project.
77% of guys are comfortable talking to girls about sex, and 82% are comfortable talking to other guys.
87% of girls are comfortable talking to other girls about sex, but only 51% are comfortable talking to boys.
Slut, an immoral or dissolute woman, a dirty, slovenly woman, a prostitute.
What you think a slut is.
I'm sorry you can't read this, but it's definitions.
I call my friend slut as a joke.
59% of boys have called someone a slut.
24% of boys have been called a slut.
96% of girls have seen other girls being called a slut on social media.
72% of girls have called someone else a slut.
62% of girls have been called a slut.
11% of girls have heard teachers call other girls sluts at least once.
Upset.
Dirty.
Hurt.
Alone.
Judged.
Ashamed.
So this was an experimental class that I did with Deb Tolman, who's a researcher, a scholar on psychology at CUNY. And we wanted to bring together students who hadn't yet taken the feminism class, because a lot of our 9th and 10th graders are waiting to take this course. And we thought we would kind of galvanize students who were really wanting to ask questions about slut-shaming at the school. And we put together this laboratory class. It only met once a week for about a few months. And then we told them they could create a survey. And the survey that they wanted to do was on slut-shaming. They put together this video, and then they actually presented this video to the faculty during a faculty meeting. From there, other students who have taken the class, older students, created a separate video, which I don't have time to show you today, on slut-shaming and the word slut. And then they took it one step further by revising the dress code. And I can do a whole separate thing on how they are moving to revise this dress code with an intersectional lens. So here is transformative possibilities of intersectionality, which is that they started with PAR, then they created another video that they showed to the entire school. Then they said, how can we use this research to make change in our school? And the most obvious thing they wanted to do was to revise the dress code. And the dress code was a kind of this frankly, an old-fashioned dress code. And we're not a very strict school when it comes to dress, but the language in it seemed very old-fashioned to us. So the students themselves said this needs an intersectional lens. So they brought in the research they had done on how transgender girls are targeted, how girls of color are targeted, and they made the language of the dress code much more inclusive and intersectional for our school. And this policy is still under review. Okay, so a quick thing on boys and feminism. These are 8 boys who took the class a number of years ago, and in 2013, and they were the highest number of boys who had taken the class, and they had wound up doing things like sitting on panels on sexual harassment and slut-shaming at school, and all of this is together, right? Like, if you take the class, you become a public participant in activism beyond the class. And Nathaniel, let's see, this is Noel, who had sat on a panel about sexual harassment at school with his classmate Josie for the AAW. The UN has this Commission on the Status of Women event every year. And then Nathaniel was actually on television with Gloria Steinem for a show on Nickelodeon, Linda Ellerby, and he also talked about the impact of the class on him. And then these 8 boys created
a feminist
video
is anyone who wants equality
about how
because
feminism
they or a different group of
had
people
made
are
an
being,
impact on them.
Subjugated because of who they are.
My name is Brooke Abraha. I'm a senior at LREI, and I am a feminist.
I'm Russell. I'm 18. I'm in 12th grade.
I'm Max Freed. I'm in 12th grade. I'm 18.
My name is Noel Diggs. I'm a senior in high school.
My name is Cesar Sublencia. I'm in 12th grade.
I'm Nathaniel McGlure. I'm in 12th grade.
My name is Luis Rojas. I'm 16.
My name is Emmett Dienstag. I'm 17 years old. I'm in 12th grade, and I'm a feminist.
I'm a feminist.
And I am a feminist.
I'm a feminist.
I'm a feminist.
What were your reasons for taking the feminism class?
Feminism, the class kind of appealed to me, the curriculum, and the reason I joined was because I kind of wanted to know what feminism meant.
My reason for taking the feminism course is that, especially in high school, there's not opportunities like this that come around ever.
My sister attends Lehman College, and over there she was taking a feminism course, a women's studies course, and she just seemed to really enjoy it. It was very new. I had never heard of women's studies prior to LREI.
What was your definition of feminism before taking the class?
I didn't have a concrete definition of feminism before the class. I knew it wasn't really the perceived idea to the majority, which is that like feminism is all women and like a total hatred towards men.
My definition of feminism was any woman who wanted equality between the sexes.
One of the biggest concepts we learned in the class was this idea of intersectionality. Intersectionality is the idea that feminism goes beyond just the equality for women. It's equality between races, gender, class, sexual orientation, and so forth.
At one point we wrote Intersectionality Essay. That taught me that nothing is really one-dimensional. Like, you can't just be black, you can be black and gay, or like black, gay, disabled. There are many different things, and that don't relate to the master narrative set in place by America. So I would say that is the most important thing that I learned, was that nothing is just one-dimensional.
We've been doing a lot. I know we just moved into trafficking, sex trafficking, and amongst girls and amongst really any age of children. And then before that, we were doing things like harassment and acid attacks, which was pretty brutal.
What impact did the class have on you?
Feminism opened my eyes to just so much in the world. There are a lot of things that I just didn't know about until I came to feminism, and it really just shocked me.
How do you see the world differently now?
Oh, just every time that you read a magazine, every time that you listen to a song, you can hear the misogynistic undertones.
And I've been able to change my silence into action. If I see something I don't like, I'm not afraid to speak up, and I'll address that.
So a little bit after the class, me and Ileana teamed up again. We spoke at a conference for AAUW against the sexual harassment of students at school.
I would encourage a friend or peer in joining the feminist movement because once again, it really does embody more than just equal rights for women, or it embodies more than just benefiting only women. It can help us all.
I really try to tell them that it is a life-changing course. It'll test who you are as a person. It'll really impact you.
My definition would now be equality for all genders, but also for other oppressed groups.
My definition of feminism is anyone that believes in equality of any sort, whether it be gender, race, sexuality, that is what a feminist is. A feminist is not one-dimensional.
What do you see as the future of feminism?
Us. We're the future of feminism right now. That's why we have to keep the ball rolling. And I was asked a while ago if, as women, are they good? Or as feminists, are we good where we stand? And a lot of people said yes, I say no. There's still more work to be done.
So I show you this video because the 8 of them really felt strongly that they wanted to send a message out to the world that feminism was something that was important to them. And when they came in on the first day, they had written about why they wanted to take the class. And for many of them, they knew that somehow the culture had taught them about toxic masculinity in ways that were damaging. They just didn't know the language to begin to talk about it. And the course readings and using an intersectional lens started to give them that language, which then they decided to say, well, how do we begin to share that language with everyone else who needs to join us in doing this work? So they created this video, which wound up going a little bit viral a couple of summers ago. And part of that, I think, is for part of what I think the Miss Porter students said, which is, oh my God, it's boys talking about this. But in actuality, that's where the conversation really is needed, which is that we need both boys and girls to do this work together. I know I'm running out of time. I just want to show you a few more pictures of what we've done in the school in engaging boys. This is our head of school, Phil Casson, and this is my principal, Micah Dove-Gottlieb. Super important for administrators to be a part of this conversation, that it can't just be teachers doing this in the classroom or the diversity director doing all the work. It has to be everyone joining in on how to be intersectional, how to be feminist, how to do social justice work in collaboration. This is the photos from the assembly that I mentioned earlier. This is Jessica over here on the corner, and they did a whole thing on Black Lives Matter in that assembly. And during that same International Day of the Girl Assembly, 2 Latino boys who were in the class wound up doing a whole skit on toxic masculinity and the ways in which they had internalized messages that were damaging to them as young Latino men, which they then wound up sharing at Calhoun. So Calhoun, which is another independent school in New York, I'm sure most of you know, we brought together a panel of the boys who had taken my feminism class and 3 boys at Calhoun to create a conversation between each other. So these are possibilities, like transformative possibilities of intersectionality, bringing boys together from across different independent schools to have conversations about toxic masculinity, about feminism. We had screened the film, The Mask You Live In, and the boys did a conversation between each other on how the film had really reflected their own realities and how they wanted to dismantle toxic masculinity in their own lives. We're not going to play this right now, so I'm just going to leave it here. Let's see. I'm going to move to the next slide.
Feminism should not be like...
Can we actually put the volume down, because I can still hear the video. It's just the online. So part of what I think diversity directors get stuck with is that diversity directors don't always get to do work that is liberatory. Instead, they wind up doing like damage limitation. And this is, Sarah Ahmed, who's a professor at a school in London, university in London, said this quote at a recent conference, the National Women's Studies Association conference. And she said, often diversity work is damage limitation. But that's not why diversity directors take on the job. They want to do the job to be liberatory. They want to do the job to do rejuvenating, healing, innovative, thoughtful work. Damage limitation is damaging to them. And it's damaging for the students, right? Which is that you don't, just when something racist happens or sexist happens or homophobic happens or transphobic happens, that's not where we want to start. We want to start in a place of intersectional feminism as liberation, as rejuvenation, as transformative. So I want to offer that as a possibility, which is that the transformative effects of intersectionality is where this work can be done. And I tried to show you through my students' blog posts, through the Intersectionality Essay, that this is the kind of work we want our students to be doing, to create school cultures that are just, that are equitable, that are transformative, that honestly are inspiring. That's the kind of school I want to work in, is a school where young people are writing like this and acting in the world that are about creating more just and equitable societies within themselves and with each other. So I want to kind of ask you to think about next steps at your own school. And the questions that I have on the bottom of that first handout that you got are questions you can begin to think about for your own work. What transformative possibilities does intersectionality hold for redesigning the curriculum at your school? How does intersectionality allow us to understand our students' lives, our own lives? What if we use intersectionality to transform professional development? What if we use intersectionality to inform our design of student programs? What risks would you need to take to apply intersectionality to your program, curriculum or otherwise? And if you're a student, how would you use this in your club programs, other programs at your school that you lead? Who would you need to reach out to for support? Who is already doing this work at your school? And with whom might you collaborate? And sometimes collaboration doesn't always mean the person who's doing all this work. Sometimes you can find unlikely allies. Maybe just a minute to think about this. Maybe jot down some notes, and then we can have a conversation, a brief conversation. I know you have another session to go to. So I'm gonna kind of give you a minute to marinate this. Pick one question that speaks to you. You can revise the question to your liking. And then we'll have a brief conversation for about 5 minutes. All right. Does anybody have any initial responses to any of these questions that we've posed? Something that speaks to you? Yes, say your name and your school. Mm. Yes. Yeah, I once did a trans inclusion workshop at LREI a number of years ago, and I wanted to bring in a consultant to help us do this, and I needed to create a body of people, a committee of people who would be behind me in helping me to do this work. And I wound up finding amazing solidarity with the school nurse. Unlikely ally, but yet not unlikely ally, because gender identity issues are a health issue as well. And she wound up being one of my strongest allies in creating a more trans-inclusive environment. Yes. I can send you that slide of all the women of color feminists that we read in the class. Yes. Is there anything anybody wants to push back on? Or have a question about? Confusion. I think it has to be strategic starting points. I don't think it's like one starting point. It's kind of various starting points. Often humanities teachers wind up creating spaces for these kinds of conversations, and I think that kind of labor is, I'm happy to take on that labor, but we can't only look to humanities teachers to do this kind of work. It has to be across the curriculum. It also has to be in leadership, so administrative leadership teams need to be able to kind of look at themselves and say, what work are we missing in the way that we enact our leadership and the way that we send certain messages that we may or may not intend in our leadership? What kind of professional development is being brought to the school that may be giving a certain message about values that don't have this framework, that could be redone or reframed with an intersectional framework? A lot of schools are doing things like design thinking. That's a big thing at LREI. And I often, for me, the question is, how can design thinking be more intersectional? How can we do innovative work that, often when I see like titles at schools, like the director of innovation and instruction is different from the director of diversity. But often director of diversity is doing like super innovative work, but they're not necessarily like the same title. Like innovation is not seen as the work of the diversity director, when meanwhile they're doing super innovative work because they have to think outside the box all the time. So how can we begin to break down assumptions about people's titles, that they're actually doing work that crosses? Yes. Other thoughts or comments or questions? Any student? Yes. Yes, Kirk.
It occurs to me as I sit in this space at this time that for the schools that are involved in this organization, we are at that place of transformative intersectionality in our schools. The projects that our students are asking us to consider as we bring back our steps of what's next open up lots of conversations and the possibility of students interacting with faculty and administrators, which brings a certain level of transformation right there. It's not all just adults making the decisions. It's not the students saying, why aren't we doing it? Let's sit down and do it together.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a great model that we already have at our fingertips, and we should make better use of it.
I used to teach a course on Latino literature at LREI, and I've put it on a shelf for a few years because I was doing so much Latino lit already within this course. But the next time that I teach it, what I want to do is actually engage students in designing it with me, rather than designing it by myself. And that's a strategy too, which is to engage students in doing, in the same way that we do PAR research with students, how can we be collaborative in creating courses with our students and engaging them in the kinds of questions they want to pursue. Thank you, everybody. This was... I'm so inspired by all of you. I did take a look at all your abstracts and your summaries. I want to go to all your presentations. So thank you so much. Keep fighting the good fight. Looking forward to hearing more from you. Thanks. Okay.